Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast,
a platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, guys. Today we're joined by a guest. Her name is Soisci Porchetta. Soisci is the founder of Human Patterns, a human movement platform aiming to nurture growth, creativity, and freedom through leveraging the natural patterns of the body. Her journey has been a turbulent one. She's moved through multiple countries at a young age and discovered martial arts at the age of 15. After training in a number of different disciplines, she found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where she competed internationally for 3 years. She also competed in Muay Thai professionally for 5 years and became a world champion in 2011. Soisci now combines both physical and spiritual practices together and has taught across the globe in helping people to be more aware, to break down their limiting beliefs, and to live a more joyful, expressive life. So with that, I'd love to welcome Soisci Porchetta. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's lovely to have you here, Soisci. And Les has told us a bit about you. I guess some cliff notes and some highlights. But what we'd really love to hear is about your journey and, where you've come from, how you've built yourself to be Soisci of today. And feel free to go as far back as you like and as much detail as you like. We'd love to hear your story and how you've come to be where you are today.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I suppose I will start from the start of my life. So I was born in Rome, and so my father is Italian, my mom's Chinese, and growing up, we changed countries very often because of my father's job. He was an agronomist, which was working with agriculture and rural development, and it's just the nature of the contracts that he looked for and went with. So we moved to Zimbabwe, I think before I was 1, so I don't have much recollection of that, just snippets. And then we stayed roughly a couple of years in each country. So from Zimbabwe, we moved to Senegal. I do remember Senegal a bit more, and I was speaking some basic French, which is like what they speak there, or one of the languages to speak there. And then we moved to Kenya, and Kenya, according to my memory of childhood, was my favorite place. The scenery is very much like the Lion King. If you haven't been to Kenya, maybe you've seen Lion King. So it was a really amazing place, very much a place where I connected deeply with nature and felt that I was really a part of it and learning from it. And we did live in a mixture of city as well as very rural areas and simple towns near the countryside. So I had a mix of that. Then afterwards, we moved back to Italy for 1 year. And that's when I discovered a little bit of physical practice through gymnastics. And prior to that, I was a very weak, stiff, wimpy child. And that was kind of my first exposure of feeling like I could be strong and capable and express physically. And that was not very long-lived because we moved countries again. We moved to Hong Kong, and I just could not find like a good quality facility, which was surprising because we thought that, it's close to China, it's going to be the best, but actually it was very commercial, and I kind of stopped all physical practice once I saw that I wasn't getting what I was looking for. And by the time I left Hong Kong, I was 14. Hong Kong was an extremely tough time for me, so everything that I kind of feared as a child about my life kind of came true. Like my family split up, and there were financial difficulties. Not that as a child you think of finance, but you experience them, and different kind of family traumas coming out. So I was not in a good place. I also did not like the physical space of Hong Kong. So if I compare that to Kenya, it was like the opposite, right? And for my friends that haven't been to Hong Kong, I often describe it as a combination of the Matrix and Gotham City, or Blade Runner, right? Like that kind of merged environment. Of course, very vibrant and with a lot of material abundance and wonderful things, but it clashed with how I like my desires or values, like deeper things in life. So that was for 4 years, and it was a tough time. And as a teenager, it's already, I feel more sorry for the parents, to be honest, but for me it was also tough. And I kind of got drawn into a more material world. I didn't question so much. And after that, I moved to the Caribbean to live with my father in Barbados. So this is from 14 to 16 years old. We lived in Barbados. And Barbados was, again, a small, simple island with a lot of nature, and everything was much slower. So that was very healing for me. And my father's also a very spiritual person. He's the person who also introduced me to my guru that I have now. So we had challenges, but there was a lot of growth and healing happening, living in a simpler life, and starting to be drawn to questioning things again. But when I say again, I forgot to mention that when I was around the age in Senegal, so let's say between 3 and 5, I had a lot of questions about the world, about truth, and the quote that you guys have on the website from Morpheus in the Matrix, right, about knowing something is missing or wrong, and it's like it's really like a splinter in your brain that's like not letting you just be okay with accepting things as they appear. I kind of had that at a very young age, and I remember asking my mom and other adults questions about the world, about the universe, about God, and I was so dissatisfied with their answers. Like my intellect was very limited as a small child, but I knew that whatever answer I was given was, as I would say to them, like, you're not answering my question. So there was this kind of yearning to find out what more there was to beyond what meets the eyes or what the senses pick up. So I had this from a young age, and during my time in Hong Kong, so from 10 to 14 years old, this kind of went to sleep. And it pretty much went to sleep until I was around 30 years old. So for quite a while, I got pulled into the world. I suppose in the Caribbean, I had a little bit of glimmers of curiosity, and I did change my lifestyle. Like I looked into Rastafarianism and a little bit of Buddhism, and changed, tried to be like vegetarian and more connected with nature. And I didn't have any guide or teacher, but I was, I would read like some self-help books or books by Paulo Coelho, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and they kind of sparked something in me very strongly. So I would meditate just with ignorantly. I would sit and meditate, which was awesome. But that lasted around a couple of years, and I quickly got drawn fully into the world. So after Barbados, I moved to England, and I had been doing martial arts for a couple of years. So that started in Barbados, continued in England. The art itself changed because as I moved countries, if I didn't find something of the right feeling, I would just drop it and look for a certain quality of practice, sort of teacher. So with the martial arts, that was quite a fulfilling and empowering path. But outside of that, I got very much sucked into worldly things. Like in England, I felt there wasn't much to do. It's always cold and gray and miserable. So you just go to the pub with your friends. And I'm actually like allergic to alcohol, but I just adapted to the culture. Not that I became a big drinker, but just kind of having a more materialistic lifestyle and seeking contentment in the world. So England was another 2 years or so. I finished up high school, and then I moved to Hong Kong, and it felt like an accident. And of course there are no accidents, because my intention was to move to Taiwan and teach English there, but the plan fell through and I was staying with my mother at the time in Hong Kong. So I remained there. And I was very resentful about this fact, even though I manifested it myself, of course. And I stayed there for 10 years. So I feel that there was a lot of karma with the place and a lot of lessons to be learned. And a lot of growth really did come from there. So I had been attracting a lot of like unhealthy intimate relationships. I started to become bodily obsessed through physical practice. So with martial arts, I was pretty obsessed. I was just training really hard every spare moment I had. And I did have a lot of joy in it. It was releasing stress and kind of releasing like whatever pain was residing inside, but it was also a form of self-empowerment, of connecting with other people and working together with them in a more meaningful way. And there was a lot of lessons I took from the martial arts practice, but as I switched to a more fitness and movement oriented approach, I became more bodily obsessed, more clinging onto the image of the body and also the skill sets that I was acquiring. So more attachment came and less empowerment. That kind of led me to start feeling a bit empty inside, and kind of like a peacock show, right? Like, yeah, I can do all this really cool stuff. And I started teaching, and even with the teaching, there was attachment to the results that the students were getting. Like it was just not coming from a higher place, right? So that started to lead me to a lot of questions. And throughout my time in Hong Kong was also when I competed a lot. So that was the Jiu-Jitsu and then Muay Thai. And I eventually switched to Muay Thai because there were more opportunities to compete in that sport at the time. And I also spent a lot of time in Thailand for competition and training, and that was really awesome. It was like some big spontaneous initiations happening in a completely different environment and culture, style of communication, and just treating competing as a way of life. It was quite wholesome, I would say. So yes, let me loop around again. So the Thailand part was throughout my time in Hong Kong. And after I finished university, so I did 4 years of anthropology, did my bachelor in Hong Kong. I went and spent 6 months just training and fighting full-time professionally before I moved back to Hong Kong and started to work in initially the fitness industry, teaching boxing and fitness stuff. And then I met my former teacher, Ido Portal, and started to shift the content that I was teaching but the students were the same, which I was very grateful for. They kind of followed me regardless of what I was teaching. And this time I had spent 4 years in Hong Kong, so less than the prior 10 years. And that was right before I moved to Australia. And that was a big life change. And I would say that a lot of questioning, and I started to become disillusioned with the world and with myself at that time. Moving to Australia was a really, really amazing decision. I knew I had to leave Hong Kong, so I saved up to be able to go elsewhere. And things were just not adding up, because I had a very healthy, high quality of life. I was fulfilled, I was successful, like with my work, and I loved this. There's something so, excuse me, so powerful and special about this land, right? It's a very, I suppose it's been untouched for a longer period of time than much of the rest of the world. Just like a few hundred years compared to thousands, or so I sensed there was something special here, and I'm still not sure exactly what is calling me. It is unfolding, but I feel that I'm called to be here, and it's amazing. So as I moved here, I started to question my obsession with the body and what I was doing with my life, because physical practice had just taken over my life. And I had originally submitted to it because I believed it would have brought me freedom and joy. But as I practiced more, I felt that I started to create a cage for myself. And eventually the friends I had were all doing the same thing. The time I had, I was doing the same thing, and there was no inner growth really. And the more success I had externally, the more unfulfilled I felt over time. So that became too strong to ignore, and I acknowledged that it was time to start turning inwards again. And throughout my adult life, my father had been suggesting I connect with his teacher or some of his teachers and start like formal spiritual practices and meditation. And I had said to him in my early or mid-20s that I knew that was my calling, but that was not the time for it to happen. That I was learning still a lot from my martial arts and my other physical practices, and that it just didn't feel like the right time. And I did meet one of his teachers, who is now also one of my teachers. He's a shaman from Cuba, teaching fourth way practices. And him and his wife teach. So I had met them both several years ago, and they looked at me and said to my dad, she's right. It's not the time for her to have like an inward practice, a specific inward practice yet. There's more to be learned from what she's doing. So this time came where I kind of hit a wall. There was no growth, no expansion, and failure started to kick in. So in my work, failure was coming. I started losing a lot of students. Physically, I was getting all these mysterious injuries. So the more I took care of myself and trained a bit less, the more I was getting injured all over the place. And just everything was kind of contracting in my life. And I realized that I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. Something had to change. So I seeked out my dad's and stepmom's teacher, who is our guru, who's based in India. And I just had a consultation with him, just almost like a counseling, right, as a starting point. And that went really well. I was a bit skeptical, like, oh, is it going to be really weird or airy fairy stuff? But it totally wasn't. It wasn't or like the new age spirituality that you see around a lot these days. He was very ordinary, very humorous, and to the point, like just speaking truth. So after a couple of sessions, I said to him that I don't really want to just have a consultation, like your advice is amazing. I actually want like to become a disciple and to have a practice and to change my life, right? I'm not just looking to run away from some problems or, you know, resolve some obstacles. I actually wanted to start doing the work inwardly because I had done it so much outwardly. And that was completely so transformative. And it had to happen at the time that it did. And meditation and spiritual practices became a central focus of my life. So not that I was meditating 8 hours a day, but I would, you know, I've been doing it for a few years, morning and evening, and also having like awareness practices throughout the day, not just like slipping back into old patterns. That was amazing. And the material world also changed and improved, right? Through changing my inner world, the outer world changed, and it was awesome. But that brought a lot of conflict because I felt like I didn't care about the body. I was like, what's the point? The body is rotting as we speak. It will leave us. And now I'm teaching movement. I still enjoy it. And I love to see the you know, improvement of quality of life that the students can get from it. And, you know, that like empowerment and all, like there's a lot of good stuff in physical practice, but I had like a distaste from it. And I kind of went between real extremes, like complete obsession to like a repulsion almost. And I could not relate to my friends who were just training all the time. I was like, oh, what a waste of time. Like, you're not going to have a one-arm handstand when you're 90 years old, right? Like, what will you be left? It's not so different from chasing a beautiful body or trying to become really, really rich and thinking that will give you freedom and fulfillment. So there was a lot of conflict. And only recently, in less than a year or so, I started to see that my calling, like I started to see get glimpses of what my role and my calling is here in this lifetime, right? Because I wouldn't do something else. I am born to work through the body, right? That was something that was activated very powerfully at a younger age. And you cannot ignore the body and leave it. So I also don't know what else I would really do, right? It's like people asked Van Gogh, like, you know, why do you paint? And he's like, well, I've tried doing other things. I am born to paint. So I felt that working with the body is a part of my calling. So now has been a really fun, challenging, and very fulfilling stage of integrating everything. So it's not about, you know, changing from one thing to another and feeling like the previous thing was negative and the new thing is positive, but it is integrating physical practice with an anthropological outlook on life, right? Because we are social creatures, and my upbringing of changing countries and cultures and adapting and studying at like formally studying anthropology fit very well with that. And then bringing in spiritual practices and using the body as a creative expression rather than a material obsession or a form of escapism, really integrating all of these together to create a physical practice that helps me and whoever I get to work with to become more self-aware and to work towards a higher self, because ultimately consciousness, all our consciousness is embodied, and that's just a fact, right? This is all we have now and all we know at this stage. So consciousness is embodied, and as much as the spiritual practices for myself at least are central and like most important, they also need to be applied and expressed, right, through the body, which is the vehicle that we express, like we take in and put back out through. So this has been the process, like the journey that's brought me to where I am, and I feel like finally it's getting to start. I'm starting to understand where it's heading, and like with anyone who's been doing something passionately for a period of time, a long consistent period of time, I just start to see how little I really know. The more I learn, the less I know, right? That doesn't discount the prior knowledge that is there and is transmittable, but it really, yeah, it shows like what a tiny drop in the ocean I really am, but that drop is important and it has a role to play in the scheme of everything. So yeah, now it's about integrating everything and using embodied practices to break habitual patterns, to become more self-aware, and ultimately to celebrate life, right? It's not just about doing dry work or focusing on weaknesses, but it's like it's an appreciation, a celebration, where each of us can creatively express, because that's a gift that we have, right? It's what makes us different from any other creature, right? We have like a high level of intellect, but we've already built machines that surpass that. So I really feel that it is our innate creativity that brings about more experience, right? And then through embodied practices, you get to kind of test those theories that inspire you and apply them on the playing field of life. So that's kind of been my journey.
Absolutely. What an amazing journey it has been. Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, so many times when you were sharing, you were just speaking my language. Like we talk about these sorts of things all the time on this podcast, but what is like very interesting to me, and I want to connect a few threads here and hopefully we can talk on it a bit more. And it's surrounding, I guess, from an early age, and this theme of intuition that I feel that I'm sensing from you is that it's been with you for a long time. So you mentioned, you know, back in Kenya when you were very young, you had some intuitive knowing that something was amiss, or you were curious, or you're questioning, right? And then I feel like to tie that together with, you know, the thread of the landscapes that you were exposed to, that has something to do with it. There was a factor there, right? In terms of nature, and then switching to, you know, the concrete jungle of Hong Kong, you know, where my parents are from and I'm very familiar with. It's the exact opposite, and how that, you know, intuitive knowing might have been, you know, drowned out by the noise, you know, the noise of society, of people, of busyness, basically, right? But then I also picked up that it feels like whenever there was a need or a calling, you knew where to turn. There was an inkling there that you knew where to turn, and you knew when to ask and when not to ask, or when you were ready or when you weren't ready. So I don't know if that's actually a question, but I want you to, talk more about that and that side of things, and how did you come to attune yourself, so acutely with or aligned with that intuition within you?
Yeah, that's it's a really good observation / question-ish, right? I don't know that if you are born with it so strong inside of you, I don't think it ever completely went to sleep. And that's not something that I put effort into, especially while I was asleep, obviously. But it's kind of lingering there. And from my understanding where I am now, I and we really are a tiny, tiny part of something much bigger, right? Like an extension of nature. Nature was my way of relating to something higher. Like growing up, also my mom's side was Buddhist, and then my father's side, without my father being religious, was Catholic, and they were kind of trying to pull me in both directions. So I did spend a few years praying to a god or deity, and then after a while I got tired because I was praying to all the deities that I had learned about. And as a kid, I would just pray literally for everyone, including the neighbor's cat. So that was very time consuming and became kind of, I lost a bit of patience, and I was like, it was kind of cute. I would, let's say if I prayed to Jesus, when I would then pray to Buddha and pray for the same like people and animals, I would say that, oh, well, when they chat together, they're going to know that this little girl was lazy and just recycled the same prayer. So I would make a different one for each one. And after like 1 or 2 years, I got kind of fed up with this and stopped. And then I became kind of very skeptical and put off by anything that had that involved the word God. But with nature, that always stayed, and I always experienced a divinity in nature. And then in recent years, there's especially through the guidance of my guru, there's been much more surrender and devotion and humility, right? Where there's the experience, understanding and acknowledgement that I am just a tiny, tiny part of something much bigger than me. So all the success that I have has been graced to me. It's not through the sheer effort of my own ego, right? And same with all the suffering has been also given to me very specifically. So all, as you know so well, and is a big part of your work, right? Your suffering is very appropriate for you at the right time, and it holds the key for further liberation and growth and insight. So I did, even during the years that I felt very much asleep, not kind of complain about my suffering. I suffered it, and verbally there'd be whinging about the feeling of suffering, but never that I don't deserve this, or this is unfair, like, someone else should have it, or I'm not strong enough to deal with it. There was never that kind of doubt or shadow present, even when I was very much asleep and ignorant. And I think that kind of, there was just a knowing in the background that did not go to sleep. to kind of embrace and see what lay on the other side of the suffering. And I knew I had to change my actions. And then, of course, there were many blind spots as well. So let's say in the early years with intimate relationships, that was a big blind spot. Maybe for 10 years, I repeated the same thing. And it didn't take the moment of recognition, of understanding can happen with anything at any time, right? So I was kind of whinging to my stepmom one day about these partners that I was attracting and how like unhappy I was, or they were very inappropriate relationships. And she was advising me and also joking, and she's like, well, you know, if you keep you just seem to keep purchasing the same product wrapped in different packaging. And it was just like a light bulb moment. I was like, oh my God, yes. And what an idiot I am. I've been doing this for like repetitively for 10 years. How can I blame any of these people? Like, I have attracted or manifested and chosen to engage in this. So that immediately just switched it. Like, this one little sentence shared as a bit of a joke changed it. So there were many of such little moments throughout my life, whether I was questioning or whether I was just contently indulging in a materialistic life. There would be these signs, and I would often catch them and be guided by them. And I also, every time I ignored any kind of intuition, I immediately paid a price. So I knew that if this, feeling I couldn't pinpoint came up, that I had to listen to it. And now it's become like crucial and central, because there's something higher that's guiding all of us. But as we are so busy and preoccupied with the mundane, with the worldly life that we have, we don't see what's in plain sight, right? So I saw, not that I see a lot now, but it's definitely a big difference to even 2 years ago. Like the way I view and interact with the world, or even perceive myself, has changed very, very much. So there would always be signs or little gut feelings, which every human being has. And I think everyone kind of knows that if they ignore it, there's some price to pay. A similar or a different event will bring about a similar problem or feelings of constriction, and then you will have to face it again and either repeat the same thing and keep going round a loop, or change something internally. So there were lots of hints that were there, and some of them I managed to see, and the ones that I missed, but so is life, right? It's welcome to the real world.
Welcome to the real world indeed. And there's actually something I want to draw you back to, which weaves in nicely with what you were just explaining for all of us, which is, you mentioned that our suffering is very appropriate for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting and a very true statement to make, because you just mentioned as well that if we don't learn certain lessons, they keep coming back over and over and over again. But then when we take the time to actually listen, or trust our gut, we realize, maybe we haven't really been listening so well, and that's why it keeps revisiting us.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, one of my favorite quotes, is, "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it," right? And I feel like that is something that applies on an individual level as well as a collective level, right? And I think that we see it, each of us, we've seen it individually in our own lives. We've been able to experience them. I talk about mine all the time. It was cancer.
Yeah.
Leading up to the point of cancer, I too had these itches, these this knowing, but I just ignore them like we mostly do. We can easily suppress these things with all the external stimulus that is available in the world, and all the ways to escape. And I sought all of them, right? Just to essentially escape or run away from those hard questions that I needed to ask myself. But as well, if we reflect on the current state of the world, you know, globally, we can sort of draw parallels on this notion of not learning from what has happened in history to then correct course toward, you know, where I guess intuitively being led, you know, as a collective people, as a group, as a society.
Yeah, totally. And I really believe that the the collective is a representation of the individual, right?
Absolutely.
So the work fundamentally can only be done on the individual level as a starting point. What happens from there is also not up to you or me or any of us, right? There's something higher at play, but most human beings are just looking for answers externally and shifting blame externally, right? So people love to speak about how terrible politicians are and what they're doing to society and the planet, and, you know, what the neighbor's doing and what this relative's doing. But like, the attention has to come back to the self to recognize, like, well, so what if this president is making these terrible choices? It doesn't mean that they're not making, you know, harmful choices, but what can you do about it, right? It's almost like I rather be intellectually and emotionally entertained and stimulated by projecting outside and thriving off of this drama than actually directing the attention inward and saying, okay, well, I also have very limiting habits, and some of them are unconscious too, right? So how much like looking, right, does it take to start being able to see these things that really limit me, right? And not just like understanding the story, but just seeing how that has become an ingrained neural pathway. So I don't know if you have like jealousy and anger in that comes up in childhood, maybe learned from a parent, or through some traumatic event that comes up, and then it starts to pop up throughout your life at supposedly random moments, you know, with a partner, with a colleague, with whoever, you know, bringing attention there to try and burn off these tendencies is really necessary. Because unless that's done, how can you change the world if you don't even know yourself, right? And that's a big thing, but people cannot be forced to turn inward. It has to happen from some kind of hunger, like something is missing, or maybe the suffering has really become so much that there is no other way. So you know, and people have had like people like Eckhart Tolle, it was sheer suffering that this amazing awakening came about, right? And then they had to go still and learn from teachers, etc. But yeah, the suffering really holds a lot of clues and keys to the freedom and realization. And when that like weight lightens, like you can be of so much better service to others, right? And if everyone had like some of this happening within them, the world would be very different. But it is a minority of people that are inclined that way. So I suppose everything in its own organic time, and playing out its own role in this cycle, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that you just explained that resonate with me. You mentioned a few times now that, you know, like we're all just a drop here in this big collective, right? But I definitely agree as well that us as individuals make up the collective. It's our individual experience on all these millions, billions of levels that come together to form this collective experience. And if we're drops, it's true to use an analogy that, you know, drops make up the ocean.
Yes.
And the ocean is its own movement and force, right? But it is made up of us, the drops.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned that, you know, it's hard to change. And usually it takes some sort of precipice or suffering that's become too much to want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with that as well. And it's kind of bring that up for people to acknowledge that if you do feel like you're suffering, that's maybe a sign for you to think about why you are feeling that and why you might need to look at changing something in your life. And other people don't change us. Only we change us. And I think, you know, I don't know if you've had experience in this, but I've had it. I know Les has had it from conversations we've had, but whenever you try to change someone else, it's very hard. And when you think about it at a base level, right, like it's hard to change yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so like, how are you really going to change someone else? Like you really need to want to change yourself. And if you look at your suffering as clues and keep in mind that it is appropriate for you, right? There's so much to be gained from being conscious of the suffering that you are experiencing and then what it's trying to tell you. I think that's really the key.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I like to explain it is that, you know, help is really a request, right? It's not an offer. Like you can't truly offer help in that sense because it has to be requested, you know, it has to be something that is truly wanted and felt. Like you have to reach out for help, you know. And that's such a vital thing, especially in the world today. Like there's a very strong tendency for people to just, you know, they feel like they know what is right. So they'll try and, you know, speak it as gospel so strongly and so dogmatically. And this is right. I mean, there's that pushback, right? There's that resistance to things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like at the end of the day, like we've been saying this whole time and how you've, you know, explained so eloquently, you know, it's the keys in the suffering, right? Like we must learn from the wisdom of, you know, all the elders that have passed and throughout history, right? Like Joseph Campbell says, you know, the cave that you fear to enter holds a treasure that you seek, right? That's in the suffering and what you fear. And it's, if you put it in current context, it seems like a very courageous act. But this is the act and duty of human being. And that's plain and simple, right? Simply to recognize the shadow, recognize what we fear, recognize the suffering, and then learn from that, learn the lesson that lives inside that is embedded in that suffering. And that is how we evolve and that is how we grow, you know, it's inherent in that fact. But I guess it's this funny like paradox, I guess, because there came a turning point in human history where we sort of discovered that we can lean toward, you know, the desire and comfort of the pleasure of comfort, you know, and we really, you know, lean towards that now. And that's where I guess society as a whole, or modern society, well, that's where we thrive, in making things easy, in making things simple, in making things comfortable, in making things feel good and happen immediately almost. Like, you know, we want things straight away and we want them to feel good straight away all the time. But I feel that on the flip side, that creates like a hindrance for us to be able to navigate, you know, the inner world, you know, and be able to truly evolve as human beings.
Yeah, totally. The attention gets completely pulled outward, and that inner voice gets like drowned out, right? And I've seen with some friends and students who are extremely wealthy, so it's very quick for them to have access to all the comfort, right, and pleasure, and even the outer world becomes numbed, right? Because like my guru gives this example many times. He's like, okay, so if you like an ice cream gives you like comfort and joy and pleasure, so like have one ice cream, and then now have 2 ice creams. Here, I'll buy you a 3rd cone. Now eat 6 ice creams. Suddenly the pleasure has become like a torture, right? And it's a really nice example of seeing how like the world cannot fulfill you. It's not that you have to like abstain and not enjoy the worldly pleasures, but the joy does not lie in there. It is very limited and short-lived.
Yeah. And you mentioned this concept of integration. And I feel like, you know, it's not about sort of abstaining from one thing, being so extreme in one area, and then learning something new and thinking everything you thought was bad, and now this is the new truth, right? So could you talk a bit more about that for us? Just in terms of how you have used integration in your own life to come to, and what that's done for you. Because I guess, you know, there was a point you talked about where you felt caged by the life you had created for yourself, and kind of in that fitness world and being very attached to the body. And then from that, it sounds to me like you had attached your identity to that at that point in time. And then you went on to speak about attachment versus empowerment. And it feels like integration of different elements of your life was the key to coming to that realization of attachment versus empowerment, and being empowered instead of being attached, and identifying with just one thing at that time.
Yeah. I suppose it's been like within my personality to get obsessive with something that I believe in and am passionate about. And that definitely has pros and cons, right? Progress comes through consistent effort and action. And especially if it's coming from like a conscious place and not like escapism or self-punishment or attachment. And as a human being, attachment, like it always creeps in one area or another. We will always have something, right? It could be a child or anything, right? So I suppose that was something that had to be broken down before it could expand. It brought me a lot of success to be obsessive with something, whether it was in fighting or in teaching or and even meditation practice. I think that would be one of the best obsessions to have, provided it doesn't become an escapism, right? Because a lot of inner work has to be done in the world. And that's why a lot of teachers, they don't say like, come and live with me in the mountain for the next 20 years. They're like, go home and have dinner with your family and see if you feel this joy and bliss and compassion for all of them, especially when there's like a, you know, heated discussions, etc. So deal with it in the world as well as in that inner space that you cultivate for yourself. So I think I had to get kind of a bit obsessed in each area to recognize that its limitation, and then to see that each step, that each chapter I had lived in and immersed myself in had a lot of goodness in it, like, right? So when I would move from one chapter to the next one, there would be like, oh, the new one is better and the old one was not serving me. But that's seeing it very like from a limited perspective, not seeing it as a whole, because nothing is inherently bad or good. It will have all sides. So it has been like, again, a kind of like my calling here to have lived each of these chapters quite fully, and then start to recognize like, okay, well, I don't need to focus on the limitation of the one I'm not in. I should really have a more abundant and integrative mindset to make sense of all that has happened so that it can serve my higher self. And through the work that I do, ultimately, my wish is to be of service to others. And by integrating, it's a much more holistic and digestible platform for people to, like, a table with many diverse foods that they can eat from, right? And like you guys were saying, like, you can't teach someone something. They have to come. You can lay food on the table, and if they're hungry, they'll eat it, and they may not want to eat the berries, but they'll want to eat the radishes or whatever it is. So if I can put out foods that, so food, cooking and food is a big passion of mine as well. If I skipped that part. So training and then cooking, they were like parallels that I spent equal time and love investing into. So I use food quite a bit as an example also when I'm teaching. So if I can lay out foods that I know quite well and have put love into cultivating, diverse ones are laid out on the table. And then the people that want to come to the table that I am serving on, they will pick the ones that are appropriate for them and enjoy them and thrive from them. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it at the moment. And it's not like I have found my like method or structure. I think it will always be flexible and loose because also the type of learner and being that I am is very intuitive and free flowing. But right now it is still in a phase where it's amalgamating. It's not like set. So let's say, I think 5-10 years from now, it will look quite different. It will be somewhat more structured and more solid and easy to kind of present and describe. So it's still like in research mode, but it's come together, which is awesome, because the last few years have been only research mode and waiting and kind of fumbling around, picking up one tool, not getting it, putting it down. So yeah, it really has been in my young life, a whole life's work and journey coming together.
And I love the analogy of the food on the table, and people will come and eat what they feel like, or they resonate with, or they like to eat. A wonderful analogy. I mean, that's true service, right? You put your love into your work, and you lay it out for the world. And if it resonates with you, if you like the taste of it, come eat. If you don't, cool. Eat something else. I love that. What I want to talk about as well, I guess this notion of your flexibility in your approach and your evolution, and what I pick up through this, like how you explained it as well, and you mentioned the word previously in terms of like cycles, right? It talks to this, birth, death, and rebirth type, cycle and model, right? That is very, I guess, obviously it's very common when you talk about seasons, and it's very easy for us to recognize in the seasons of nature. The death period is obviously in autumn, when in the fall and winter, right? When everything is cold and freezing, but then spring is the time of emergence and rebirth, and summer is when everything is thriving. And I mean, do you resonate with this, I guess, model throughout your life? And I guess it talks to the fact that you're not attached to anything in particular or any mode of operation going forward, and acknowledging that, in 5-10 years time, it's going to be different, and that is acknowledgement of continual and ever growing evolution of the human being. Like, we're never always going to be the same way. Like, attachment to that stagnation is to be left behind in a ever shifting, cyclic world.
what you said about the seasons very much resonates with me. So it brings me to become more observant, right? And this has been something that in the last couple of years I have also integrated into my training and teaching, right? So I was like, well, I do it with food, right? I'm trying to eat like locally, seasonally, being more connected with the environment, the land that I'm in, right? And I wasn't doing it with the training. There was like a following a program and chasing goals. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of really missing a big chunk of like, I'm repressing stuff, I'm ignoring stuff, and I'm not receiving a whole bunch of guidance and knowledge. So the training started to change with that, right? So in winter, like you say, it's a time to conserve, right? If you look at how animals behave, some will hibernate, some will just, everything's slower, right? And with my own physical practice teacher in Fighting Monkey, Josef Fruchek, he'll speak about this as well, the seasons, but also that the energy, the life force you have physically is not endless, and we're not immortal, and that needs to be respected, understood, and cultivated. So if you are pushing yourself during a time that you have an opportunity to cultivate, you are not filling your reservoir, right? You want to build a reservoir. So life is going to give you droughts and all kinds of things, and you don't know when they'll happen. So if you have the chance to cultivate that, cultivate it so that you have a reserve when a war comes, when the drought comes, right? So that's been something that's really influenced my work very nicely. Seasonal training, right? Cultivating, nourishing, restoring, warming, and then spring, like you see, even like urban human beings in spring, they start to be more active, and maybe they think I'm preparing for my beach body or whatever it is, but I think there's unconsciously they actually know, they're like, I feel a bit more energetic, there's more sunlight, and I know that come summer I'll want to be like pumping energy, right? I'm like recharged by the sun and the elements. So that's happening, I think, whether people are conscious or not, right? And then maybe in winter, okay, no one sees your beach body and you want to drink hot chocolate in bed, but that's more the practice you should be doing, really. And it's kind of like following that, and that's been really helpful with so-called structuring how I'm working, and it makes that kind of listening, observing, guided, right? Because then it's not completely fluffy and random, like, oh, today let's dance and tomorrow we're gonna like go hardcore with a high intensity strength work. It's actually respecting something, that higher thing, again, to guide how to practice. And with the physical practice that I do now, there is a kind of rough model that it's not always spelled out for the students unless they have become like really into the practice and connecting with, they want to eat all the food on the table. So the few that would want to do that, there'll be like through each task that changes in relation to like nature and whatever's happening around. There'll be like an observation phase, whether it's of the external thing or the internal state, right? Then there'll be like a sense of awareness. So it's being taken in, like, what is the experience? What state am I in? What's the environment now? How are the people around me? What state are they in? And then there'll be this like processing, like a self-reflection, making sense intellectually, intuitively of what is going on. And then there'll come an intention, right? So based on what I've been able to take in, I now set an intention for where I want or need to be, which may be in the same place or in a very different place. And then finally, that has to be followed up with repetitive conscious action, right? Because we that's how we ingrain our neural pathways. And it gives us the opportunity to change and grow and thrive. And so that's kind of how I like what's been coming together with integrating all the work. And this is applicable to any change of, activity, environment, state. It's just something to kind of merge the inner and the outer worlds, and give that platform for like developing towards a higher self, right? And
Yep.
it seems like we've really been kind of coming back to how all the work really can only be done on the self, right? Even if you
Absolutely.
have, like, you can't teach someone something, you can't change a whole system in a faraway land, but you can change yourself.
Absolutely. And I think it sort of circles back nicely to this point of, intuition and even using what we see very, very regularly with our own eyes, the cycles of nature. And I love how you've spelt it out for people in terms of adapting it to what you do, and just, whether it's an intellectual knowing of what is happening outside through the seasons, or, having that connection with nature and intuiting the need to hibernate and then coming out and emerging and all that sort of thing, right? Whether you intellectualize it or intuit this knowing, it's for us all to see, and to observe and be aware of this is to, actually come. It comes with humility, right? Because you're respecting and honoring the cycles of nature, which is, really the higher power that we are simply a part of, and like there's also this, very fine line that we tread when we tell people it's okay to rest, and then go into pleasure and enjoy pleasure every now and then and things like that, and it's a choice for oneself. And like, this fine line, the how the Zen describe it is, it's less than the breadth of a hair's width. It's less than the width of a hair. That's how fine this line is. And that in itself for me is, again, holding oneself to account, right? No one else can say it is or it isn't, like nourishing to oneself or an escapism, but
Yeah.
yourself, right? You yourself will know you are not lying to anyone else but yourself when you dive one way or another, right? So that again, it comes back to this point of everything starts and ends, from within oneself. And I feel like that's sort of been the theme within our discussion today, and perhaps like a really nice way to, conclude the discussion. Unless you guys want anything to sort of as closing statements on that.
No, not so much. Yeah, I suppose the suffering came up a lot as a big part of this talk, in a in a place of coming from a place of like self-inquiry and switching to like an empowered, abundant mindset. But I guess I would like to just add that not only suffering brings inner progress, right? There's also like, if as you're more present, there's an experience of appreciation and gratitude, because like, of course, suffering like a really awesome quote I love by Sri Nisargadatta is, a suffering demands investigation, right? So that's like a key for more joy and liberation, but also experiencing love and presence are also progress, right? So often in spirituality, we focus a lot on effort and hard work and turning suffering into strength, but it's not all just like a dark road, or just going into emptiness and void, but there's like color and joy and bliss, and that also teaches us truths, right? So I just wanted to add something like the light side of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Progress can also be very wonderful and positive coming from that place.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on it before. The keys to this really is like the conscious and intentioned approach to life, right? And to seeing that in the present moment, right? And that's all it's about. And you bring up a great point in terms of, it's not only, this effort and pushing forward and things that seem very, unattractive or uncomfortable, but like even the intention to just be and do nothing is a conscious choice. And, beautiful, bliss, beauty, joy can be found in that intentioned conscious choice.
Totally. And that is connecting with truth, because that is actually our essence, right? That drop of water that makes up the ocean, all of us little droplets, in essence, underneath all those layers and impressions, it is pure and beautiful and joyful and blissful, right? And the more we can quieten the outside, which promises us that joy and all of that is outside, the more that can like be experienced and come through. So it's ultimately connecting with truth and the essence of what we are.
Absolutely.
Sure. There's just one more thing that I'd just like to talk with you guys about, and that's kind of ties a lot of different things we've spoken about, seasonality and different periods of your life. And we've talked about obsession as well. And I'm really glad, Soisci, that you brought up, it's not all just suffering and strength through the suffering. There's also the beautiful times and the good times, and we experience those. And when we're conscious in those moments and present, we can enjoy them. But I have this notion that, balance isn't a micro thing. It's a very macro thing. Like balance actually occurs over time and over a far greater time lapse than we usually think about. I feel like, especially now, we're all taught, or a lot of us are seeing people trying to teach us that, you got to have balance in your day. So you have to do this for your fitness, but then you have to meditate, and then you have to grind really hard and work really hard, but then spend time with your kids and eat healthy. But then on Tuesday you can eat a donut. It's like trying to balance everything really fast. But when you reflect and take a look at, people that you look at and you think they've had some extraordinary lives that you would want to live, they've had these periods of intensity, right? And I think obsession's a word that, kind of gets this dirty tarnish to it sometimes. Whereas I think personally, to me, obsession is just intense focus, right? And I think you'd be able to relate to the fact that being obsessed at certain points in your life yielded some really good results for you and things that you enjoyed, right? Yeah. Like, I think it would have been very hard for you to be a world champion if you weren't intensely focused on your training at the time, and that being your goal, right? And then in step with that, you kept a very intense focus on training and physicality and things like that. And then you realized how that wasn't serving you too. But in the macro, over time, having that period of obsession, reflecting upon it, doing something different, intensely focusing on another area, it balanced out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very insightful. And totally true. It's, we see things in a short term or small scale or linear, but none of those are real, right? They're just like tiny, tiny chapters, or even like paragraphs in from a whole book. And yeah, often you do get to where you can't go any further before you change, and that's a necessary part to, yeah, like I guess you're going too much this way, too much that way. Oh, this is towards the center, right? And to you generally need to experience, not intellectualize it, right? And that's why, let's say, you could read like Eckhart Tolle's books, which are amazing, but unless you practice and like experience in your own life, that remains as intellectual information, just as every other book and piece of news you've taken in your life. So yeah, that all of it put together, when approached consciously, does create that kind of balance point. Yeah, I really agree with you.
And I think that imagery that you just mentioned is really beautiful. You know, going one way to another, in the end, we're just coming to the center eventually, right? That's what we're sort of looking for. You know, finding balance, harmony in life, coming home. You know, finding home, however you want to explain it. You know, it's not about sticking to one side or another, but experiencing it to find our center. So beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we can talk for ages, but, you know, I don't want to take up your entire day. It was a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to, I guess, give you the floor if you want to let our audience know where they can find you, if they want to, you know, get in touch or find out a little bit more about who you are.
Oh, yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a joy and a pleasure, and very warming and stimulating to share this talk. Well, I'm based in Canberra, and now I am working at a movement facility called Praxis. It's the only movement facility in Canberra, so pretty easy to find. And yeah, I try to, I make myself be a little bit active on social media. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I do have Instagram. I think it's Soisci Human Patterns, and same with like a Facebook page, and my website is humanpatterns.net. And yeah, I do occasionally share some content, like once in a blue moon I'll put a blog or make a video to share with people. So yeah, and I'll share this talk as well, because it was pretty awesome.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, we'll definitely share all the links in the show notes for people to find you if they would like. So thank you for that. Shaun, where can people find you, mate?
Yep, easiest place to find me is just on Instagram. So it's Shaun_Coop. So SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, Les?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, findingspace.co. That's probably the best place for you to, I guess, keep in touch with me if you want to sign up to a newsletter or email me directly and say good day. Otherwise, on Facebook and Instagram, I'm pretty active there as well. It is at findingspace.co. You can also get in touch with Shaun and I via our email address, the Hustle and Flow podcast @gmail.com. If you've got any questions about this episode or past episodes, if you'd like to become a guest on our show or anything else, yeah, just shoot us through an email and say good day.
And I'd really like to take another moment to thank you, Soisci, for joining us today and for sharing your story and all of the insights that have come along with your growth. And yeah, if there's something today that, you know, as a listener, you resonate with, a nugget that you're able to pick out, I'm sure there's plenty. There's a lot that I picked out from things that you mentioned today, Soisci, that I'll be going back over myself. So thank you for those. Yeah, just share this with one other person. That's how we grow the podcast and get these conversations into the ears of people to provoke some thought and hopefully get you thinking in another manner that you might not have today. And that helps you. So until next time, guys, thanks.
See you later, guys.
See you.